Oh, hello there. Yeah, you snuck up on me, you sexy little devils. As you might have guessed by the title of this video, it is time for my 2025 NFL season predictions. I go team by team and then give my year-end awards, just like I've done in years past. Every single game is predicted and accounted for. So buckle up and get ready for an amazing video right after this short break. Before I begin, I want to thank DraftKings for sponsoring this video. The NFL season is almost upon us, and that is why I want to bring DraftKings' Best Ball contest to your attention. Best Ball is the biggest fantasy contest DraftKings has ever offered. What you have to do first is pay a $20 entry fee to get into the Best Ball contest, and this will score you another ticket to play for free to win a share of $15 million. You can sign up using my promo code Barry because I always have your back. DraftKings will crown 2 millionaires. The first place winner will receive $2 million and second place will receive $1 million. But you're probably asking, what does this contest entail? Well, teams are drafted in a snake draft, and that roster is then used for the duration of the entire contest. That means there's no roster management for you to worry about. There are no crossovers between teams like you typically find in a daily fantasy sports contest. So what are you waiting for? Sign up for DraftKings Best Ball contest now for a chance at winning a share of $15 million. And don't forget to sign up using my promo code Barry. Let's start off with the AFC East, and of course, the number one spot, we have Buffalo. This isn't going to change. This is basically, with the AFC East, we're in the same spot we were with the Patriots for 20 years, except now the Bills are the big bullies on the block instead of the Pats. It's as long as they got Josh Allen and they play in that division, they're going to be a Super Bowl contender every year as long as Allen is healthy. But again, much like there's been in past previews, in past prediction videos that I make every year, the problem remains the same, and as we've seen again, like last year, the question for Buffalo is not whether or not they are a good team or even if they're a great team. The question is, can you beat Patrick Mahomes? Can you beat the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs? And to this point, they can't. So I have zero doubts that in the regular season, once again, they'll be a team that is going to push 12 or 13 wins. They'll have a confusing loss mixed in there like they always seem to do, but they'll finish, they'll probably, and like they always seem to do, they'll probably end up beating Kansas City in the regular season, okay? But that's as much as I can go into detail about the Bills. So once again, expect a great regular season from Josh Allen. As usual, expect a dominant regular season from the Bills. They should win the AFC East easily, but when it comes to the playoffs, it's really just Russian roulette. If they're somehow able to not have to face the Chiefs, they might finally be able to get to the Super Bowl. It's a very similar situation to the Steelers and the Patriots when Brady was with the Patriots and the Steelers could never beat Brady, but the Steelers still made 3 Super Bowls and won 2 of them from 2005 to 2010 because in all 3 years they made the Super Bowl, they didn't have to play New England. I think at this point that is the Bills' only route to actually getting to a Super Bowl or winning one, is to just have the luck of the draw and not have to face Kansas City. But overall, I have them going 13-4. Next up is the New England Patriots, and for the other 3 stooges, I guess, of the AFC East, I don't think the Patriots are going to see a type of jump where they become a playoff team, but I think it's going to be hard for them to be much worse than they were last year with Gerard Mayo, who seemingly had no direction. Even the last year under Belichick, the Patriots were still an elite defensive team in 2023. It's just that they had the worst offense in the league. Last year, they were bad on both sides of the ball. And now you bring in Mike Vrabel, who had some sort of success with the Titans as their head coach. He had a couple good years there. And again, it really all rests on the arm of Drake May, and they've already drafted Will Campbell to be the franchise left tackle, and I think that that's the right decision, that's the right thought process, because really, at the end of the day, if not just for the division, the AFC East, you're probably, for the foreseeable future, the next couple years, you're probably not going to win the AFC East. Even if Drake May and the team does improve, you're probably going to be a wild card team because you won't be able to beat out Allen and the Bills. But even beyond that, it's more so about the entire conference, because you think about all the great quarterbacks that are in the AFC. If you don't have a great quarterback, you really don't stand a chance. So forget about just even winning the AFC East or winning the division or even making a playoff game. Patriots, they have a lot of work to do. It really depends on how good you think Drake May is going to be. I look at him kind of as more of a poor man's Justin Herbert, and I think the Patriots will end up going 7-10, which will be an improvement over the last couple years, but still in the big picture pretty mediocre because they just don't have that much talent. They just don't have that much talent still outside of a few players. Maybe Drake May will have a great rapport with Stephon Diggs. Who knows? But I don't think that's going to be enough to make them relevant anytime soon. I have them going 7-10. Next up, the Miami Dolphins. This is more of a hunch decision, and I guess in a way all of these decisions are hunch decisions because they're my predictions. But for whatever reason, it seems like a lot of the vibes coming out of Dolphins headquarters and the Dolphins neck of the woods is that Mike McDaniel is essentially a lame duck coach in a way that the players, or maybe I don't know what's going on, but it seems like every time I hear news coming from the Dolphins, it just seems like there's something amiss, where there's smoke, there's fire type of thing. Whereas the first couple years, McDaniel's been there for 3 years. They made the playoffs twice. They went 0-1 both years in the playoffs. Last year, they missed the playoffs, largely because Tua Tagovailoa got hurt again, and their offense was just completely miserable without Tua, which shouldn't happen when you have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, but it happened, and it seems like the whole organization is kind of ready to move on from Mike McDaniel, and they view him essentially as an offensive coordinator in a head coach role, a guy who might not be able to control the locker room. I don't know. That's just the vibes. I've just gotten very morbid vibes from the Dolphins, and I think this is the year where it's all going to fall out for them. I think that just because they have Tyreek and Jalen Waddle still, and Tua is capable of going off for some really good games, I still think they're going to win a couple games. But overall, I think this team is just, we're in the market to see this team collapse and to go in a new direction. I don't even know if Mike McDaniel will make it through the entire season, but either way, I have the Dolphins finishing at 6-11, which is very, very sad. And finally, in fourth place, we have the New York Jets. The Jets, last year, I missed so badly on them, and that was when they had Aaron Rodgers, and I was kind of giving them the benefit of the doubt with Aaron Rodgers being an all-time great, but I guess I miscalculated how washed up Aaron Rodgers was. But really, if you go back and look at the Jets last year, they finished 5-12, but they were more of a 500 team. They had a couple plays here and there. They were a couple plays and some bad bounces away. They weren't as bad as a 5-12 team, but at the same time, they said to Aaron Rodgers, you know what, we're good. You're old. You're washed up. We're done with you. But Aaron Rodgers, for even though the old washed up version of him, he still is better to me than any quarterback they currently have on this roster. So I still think they got worse at quarterback. Rodgers was still liable for some really good games that no other Jets quarterback in recent memory was capable of, and that's what he showed. But now you're placing all your faith in Justin Fields, who can't read defenses. That's basically, let's just be honest about it. So once again, it's another shitty quarterback at the helm. And I would say the biggest disappointment for the Jets is defensively, they seem to regress last year. I don't know whether that's just Aaron Rodgers' bad luck, but Sauce Gardner seemed to have a down year. The big names are still there. You got Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams, and you got Garrett Wilson, and there's still some big names on the roster, but I mean, it's the Jets. And as long as if you're going to place your faith in Justin Fields to be your starting quarterback, then you're going to lose a lot of games. And you compound that with the Jets being the Jets, I think that's going to happen. I see them going 4-13, and once again being one of the biggest laughing stocks in the league. And that win versus the Bills at the end of the season there, I think that's going to be a win where, similar to this last year, where the Patriots got a win in the last week versus the Bills backups. I think that's going to be the story here with the Jets. I think they'll get a cheap win at the end of the year versus the Bills backups, which unironically will end up screwing them out of a better draft pick. Well, that sums up the AFC East. Let's go to the AFC North, which is always a pretty competitive division and a pretty difficult division to predict when it comes to who's going to win. Although, honestly, this season, not very difficult for me. I think the Ravens are going to win it. I think that every year that Lamar Jackson has been healthy, which is not talking about 21 and 22, the Ravens have won the division, and Lamar Jackson has one of the best winning percentages ever. He's smack dab in his prime. He should have won MVP last year. He was first team All-Pro last year, but they gave Josh Allen a charity MVP. Simply put, Lamar Jackson, he had one of the greatest seasons ever last year. A lot of people said that the MVP he won was a makeup for the MVP he lost rather last year was a makeup for the MVP that he won the year before, which was much more of a default MVP. But either way, he's an elite quarterback, and they got Derrick Henry as well. They're a team that once they get up on you, they're just a motherfucker to try and catch up with. But much like with the Bills, we all know the questions with the Ravens are never about the regular season at this point. They've already established established for many years now that they're an elite regular season team. Lamar Jackson is on his way to becoming a Hall of Famer. He's one of the best quarterbacks of all time. Very, very similar to the Buffalo Bills. They're essentially just like the Bills, except they don't have as bad of a playoff history specifically against the Chiefs. They've spread out their postseason misery a lot better, although they have lost to the Bills twice, including last year in the infamous Mark Andrews drop game. And I've said it during the last video I did about quarterbacks, what they have to prove. Lamar Jackson has actually gotten better in the postseason the last couple years, and he wasn't that bad at all really last year, outside of a couple plays. But when you got loaded defense, you have Kyle Hamilton, you got all these guys, and I think my defensive rookie of the year pick, spoiler alert, actually, you know what? No, I'm not going to give that away yet, but they have my defensive rookie of the year winner as well. This is a team that I can see them winning 14 or 15 games. Again, as long as Lamar Jackson stays healthy, which is the biggest key. If Lamar Jackson can stay healthy, they're going to win a shitload of games, and they might be able to even win a top 2 seed or maybe even the 1 seed. I think it's going to come down a lot to the week 4 game on the road versus Kansas City in determining who gets the 1 seed in the AFC. But either way, we all know with the Ravens, it's about what they do in the playoffs, and they have the right teams, and you just got to hope that, much like the mid-2000s Colts, that one of these years it just goes their way and you're at the table and you just get a couple lucky bounces and you get some lucky breaks that finally allow you to break through. Either way, I have them finishing at 14-3, which means that the team that took advantage of Lamar being injured in 2021 and 2022 to win the AFC North in those years, the Cincinnati Bengals, come in second place. Now, the biggest thing with the Bengals is that last year they had one of the best offenses in the league, and Joe Burrow was an elite player, and he threw for 43 touchdowns and nearly 5,000 yards, and Jamar Chase led the league in receiving yards. He won the Triple Crown. So we all know that the Bengals offensively, particularly with all the money they've invested at the skill positions, they are good offensively. They're great offensively even, as they should be, because they've invested a lot of capital there as well with T. Higgins, you know. So we know the Bengals are going to put up 30 or so points a game, but they will kind of have to, because outside of Trey Hendrickson, who they just finally re-signed to a massive deal, who was also the NFL sack leader, the defense, not very good. And last year, you all heard the media just loves Joe Burrow, and even though the Bengals went 9-8 last year, Burrow got some MVP chance and some MVP love, which leads me to believe that if the Bengals can even make the playoffs at all this year, then Burrow's probably going to win MVP. And I think that they will do that. I think that the Bengals, after going 9-8 the last couple seasons, I think they're going to bounce back. I think they're going to finish 11-6. But I also think what's going to end up hampering them, which is the same thing that's hampered them really throughout the entire Burrow era, is they get off to really slow starts at the beginning of the season, and they lose games they shouldn't, and it ends up messing with them. So I think they're actually going to lose a couple games. They'll start slow again, then hit their stride, then hit a rough patch, and then finish strong, which is what they always seem to do. But I have them finishing 11-6 and finishing in second and grabbing a wild card spot. But to this point, and this is assuming that Joe Burrow can stay healthy, which again, he's kind of a liability when it comes to health on a low-key basis. But again, 11-6 is my prediction for the Bengals. Moving on now to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and anytime a team adds Aaron Rodgers as quarterback, no matter how old he is and no matter how far away he might be from his last good season, which was 4 years ago in 2021, and since then he obviously has had a couple shitty seasons or mediocre seasons mixed in with an Achilles tear, so he's not the guy that he was. He's not the 4-time MVP. He's not a Super Bowl winner. He's not the top 5 quarterback of all time. He might be in name, but that's not the guy the Steelers are getting. It's very similar to them getting Russell Wilson last year, but to be honest with you, the Steelers are honestly the one team that it doesn't seem to matter who their quarterback is. For better or worse, they're always going to finish 9-8 or 10-7, and Mike Tomlin is going to find a way to keep his non-losing season streak going, but he's going to do it just by the skin of his teeth, and I see that happening again this year. I really do. Last year, I stupidly said that the Steelers were only going to win 6 games, and I should have known that they find ways to win at least about 3 or 4 games every year, just pulling shit out of their ass that they find ways to win these random games that they shouldn't win. So there's going to be a couple games like that this year, I think, as usual for the Steelers, where they get 3 or 4 wins to help get their record, but this isn't going to be a great team. They still have their big names defensively, TJ Watt, Cameron Hayward. They have Jalen Ramsey now. They have DK Metcalf. So there are some bigger names in the mix this year in Pittsburgh, but overall, I think that when you're relying on a quarterback who is in his early 40s to lead your franchise, unless you have a dominant elite defense, you're not going to win anything notable, or unless that 40-something-year-old quarterback is obviously on HGH or some sort of PEDs, like a former player in Tampa Bay and New England. But either way, I think that the Steelers, again, going to finish 9-8, so it'll keep Mike Tomlin's losingless season streak going, but it's going to be a one-and-done experiment with Aaron Rodgers. I think this will be Aaron Rodgers' swan song, and he goes off with one mediocre season in Pittsburgh, very similar to Shaq being on the Celtics. And finally, this was the easiest decision maybe in the whole video. The Cleveland Browns, I picked them to finish 4th and in last place in the AFC North. Simply put, if you don't have a quarterback, you are fucked. And that's what the Browns situation is, which is ironic because they have all these big name quarterbacks, or they did. They have the most famous third string quarterback of all time in Shedeur Sanders. Dylan Gabriel, another rookie, is their backup, although he played for about 20 schools in college, so I would say he is a pretty well-traveled backup. He's technically a rookie, but he's used to changing teams. Their day one starter is Joe Flacco, who is 40 years old, so yeah, he hasn't started more than 7 games since 2017, so we all know how this is going to go. Oh, and by the way, yeah, there's that other guy that they paid $230 million guaranteed, I think, who has a lot of off-field problems, named Deshaun Watson. He's also lurking in the shadows, and even if Deshaun Watson is able to come back and play, he has shown absolutely nothing to make people think he's going to be a good quarterback. He hasn't had a good season since 2020. He's been complete dog shit with the Browns, even when he's on the field. So even if Deshaun Watson is able to get back into the fold, he's probably going to be horrible again. Joe Flacco will probably be replaced after a couple games, and then it's going to come down to whether or not Dylan Gabriel is the real deal, which he probably isn't. And I'm sure we'll get a game or two of Shedeur Sanders along the way, but the whole point you have to remember is that the Browns are going to suck really no matter who their quarterback is. They have really one great player, and that's Myles Garrett. It's almost like an inverse of the late 80s Cowboys, where they had one great player in Herschel Walker, and they traded a shitload for him, and that's how they jump-started their little run there in the 90s. I don't think the Browns have that or are smart enough to do that. I don't think that could happen with Myles Garrett, but it's kind of that same situation where it's a horrible team that has one great player, only it's inverse this time. The great player is on defense. So Myles Garrett's definitely, he's always liable if he stays healthy to get his 15 sacks and to be a complete force of nature. But unfortunately for Mr. Garrett and the Browns, there are 21 other players who are on the field offensively and defensively, and they're not nearly as good as he is. So I have the Browns finishing 3-14, another forgettable season. I also think Kevin Stefanski will also be looking for a job after the year is up, even though I don't really think it's his fault, and I think that he's a good coach, and he's also handsome. Moving to the worst division in football, the AFC South, I don't really see anything changing. This is basically, it's very similar to, and because dating apps are so hot right now, it's similar to where you see a girl and she has a photo of her and her friends, and none of them are particularly attractive, but one of them is kind of like, well, it's not about who is the hottest, it's about who's the least ugly, and that's kind of what the Texans are. They're basically a 5, maybe a soft 5.5 out of 10, but they're playing in a division with 3 others who are like 4 out of 10 or worse. So that's what the Texans are, and they regressed last year despite the fact that they had the same record, and they basically, in each of CJ Stroud's first 2 years and DeMeco Ryans' first 2 years, it's been the same story. They win the division by default. They have a home playoff game in the wild card round that gets played on Saturday afternoon, usually against the Cincinnati Bengals, and they win, and then they go to the divisional round and they get the shit beat out of them, and then people say, oh, they're right on the verge of getting there, blah, blah, blah. This has been going on. They still, in their entire franchise history, they haven't made a conference championship game. There's just something about the state of Texas and NFL teams where they just hate making the conference championship game. I don't know what it is. Yeah, anyway, so the big question for the Texans comes down to, do you think we're going to get rookie year Stroud or year 2 CJ Stroud? And my gut tells me we might not get the same sort of efficiency as rookie Stroud when he had one of the best rookie seasons ever, but I also don't think he's going to be as bad bad as he was last year. That was a little bit of a sophomore slump. A good example, I guess, for Texans fans to maybe look at is a guy like Matt Ryan, who had a great rookie season efficiency-wise, took a step back as a sophomore, and then kind of found his footing again in his third year and went on to have a very, very productive career. I could actually see CJ Stroud having a similar career to Matt Ryan. Hopefully, if he does make a Super Bowl, he doesn't shit down his leg the way that the Falcons did. But either way, think about here and now. I think the Texans, they're the least ugly in a batch of 4 girls. They're going to finish 9-8. This isn't a great team. They'll get a home wild card game. Again, because some team from the AFC South is going to get a home playoff game. And whether I'm right or not about who's going to win the division, that's the case. That's just how the seeding works, which I have questions about and flaws with. But either way, I think we got Will Anderson, Neil Hunter, Derek Stingley Jr. So there's a good core group of players there. But at the same time, there's just something about the Texans where it's like, I don't know, the Texans are always going to find ways to lose. But I do think CJ Stroud will get back on the right track, but it won't be reflected in the win-loss total. I have them finishing 9-8, but winning the AFC South yet again for the 3rd straight year. The rest of these positions, really, it doesn't matter, but because I'm a man of integrity, I'm going to review the rest of the 3 teams in the AFC South, even though they all suck and they're not going to make the playoffs. Second place, we got the Jaguars, who, again, it's kind of similar to, in a way, you look at these teams, all 4 AFC South teams, and it's 4 teams who they all, in recent history, invested super high picks into quarterbacks, and the team that has won the division in recent years has been the team that had the best quarterback, which is the Texans with CJ Stroud. Even though CJ Stroud regressed last year, he was still better than Anthony Richardson and Trevor Lawrence. And again, I say it every year. I've been saying it now for 5 years. This is going to be his 5th year. Trevor Lawrence, that the ship has sailed. He's missed his boat in terms of becoming a great, dominant, generational player. We obviously know they added Travis Hunter, but to be honest with you, even though Travis Hunter is undeniably talented, I don't think he has the frame to hold up for a whole NFL season on both sides of the ball. I really think that the Jaguars would just be better suited at just having him use all his energy and his talents for one side as a receiver, because if you pair him with Brian Thomas Jr., who figures to be an absolute stud and was one of the bigger surprises last season, that's a pretty good receiving core for a team that supposedly doesn't really have a lot of other talent. They have Travon Walker, they got Josh Hines-Allen, so there are some good players on this team, but really Trevor Lawrence just not becoming the stud they thought he was going to is really holding this team back, and I think it's going to hold them back once again. But for right now, and honestly, as I'm saying this, as I'm halfway through the predictions, a lot of the predictions for this particular division, because let's be honest, none of these teams have a snowball's chance in hell of winning the Super Bowl or even getting close to a Super Bowl this year. But in terms of winning this division, it's going to depend immensely on whether or not Cam Ward pans out for the Tennessee Titans. If Cam Ward ends up becoming good and he has a CJ Stroud, Jaden Daniels type regular season, which he's talented enough to do, then I really believe that all these predictions I have for this division are going to look extremely stupid. But for the meantime, we still don't know what to see with Cam Ward. The Titans have a lot of problems. But again, back to the Jaguars for a second. I have them going 8-9 and finishing 2nd place in the AFC South and missing the playoffs once again. Now we get to the Tennessee Titans, who, as I said, with the 1st overall pick, Cam Ward, a lot of this, it just comes down to Cam Ward and a great quarterback. Again, a couple years ago, the Texans, they're fucking trotting out Davis Mills and going 2-15 and 3-14, and everyone was saying, oh, they're the worst team in the league and they're never going to be good for many, many years. Well, now they're in line to win the division for the 3rd straight season. So, but basically, you look at the Titans roster and there's just not a lot of talent here. There just isn't. And I feel so bad for Cam Ward here because he's going into a team. It's like, all right, look at the players they got. Oh, they got Jeffrey Simmons, who's a good player, but he's not a Dexter Lawrence, Jalen Carter type of interior defensive line, but he's still probably their best player. Calvin Ridley is a guy that, he always looks great in highlight reels during the offseason, and he's a good player, but he's not a dominant receiver. There's just not a lot of talent on this team. So even though I actually am a believer in Cam Ward, and I think his talents are legit, I just don't see the Titans winning enough games to really be meaningful Bowl, but they will win more games. I can guarantee you that. They're going to win more games than they did last year, and even the year before that with Will Levis playing quarterback. I mean, my goodness, I understand that bar is not very high, but still. I have the Titans finishing 7-10, which for them would actually be pretty darn good. And finally, we get to probably the worst team in the league, or one of the worst teams in the league at least, the Indianapolis Colts. Every year I've been doing these previews in recent years, all I can think about is that we should be entering the tail end of Andrew Luck's prime. Andrew Luck would be, 35, 36. He'd be in his 13th, 14th year right now. And we'd probably be talking about him as a future Hall of Famer, but instead, he retired and now he's running Stanford football. And so now we're left with probably the worst quarterback battle, at least, well, actually, maybe not the worst, but one of the worst I've ever seen between Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson. And, Anthony Richardson, as I said before, when it comes to this division, it's really about the investment these teams have put into the quarterback position. And even though I was a huge Anthony Richardson supporter, I'm off the boat. He just, if you get picked 4th overall and you lose a quarterback battle to Daniel Jones in your 3rd season, you really suck, okay? Like, you absolutely suck. You just do. I mean, that's not the fact that the team that drafted you, the coach that drafted you, watches you every day and says, you know what? This guy's not as good as Daniel Jones, who himself is one of the worst quarterbacks in recent NFL history. I mean, there is no more damning piece of evidence than that. I mean, and honestly, that's really all that matters, because you have no fucking quarterbacks. If it were up to me, I would still say, hey, we did invest a huge draft pick in Richardson, and he might be terrible, but I mean, at least there's still maybe a bit of mystery with him. Maybe he can turn it around, whereas you already know with Daniel Jones that he sucks. So I don't necessarily agree with starting Daniel Jones, but either way, it's like piss versus shit. Neither of these guys are good, and that's going to doom Indianapolis. Really, I think they're going to finish somewhere about 2-15. They might finish better than that. They might have a couple hollow wins because they play in the worst division in football. But in essence, this is a horrific team, a 1 or 2 type win team, and I just think that's how it's going to go for them, and that's just simply because they're going to have terrible quarterback production. It's a long way from the Peyton Manning era and the Andrew Luck era. Let's just say that. Moving now to the AFC West, and what a surprise. I have the Kansas City Chiefs winning the AFC West once again. I know, picking the team that's been to 5 of the last 6 Super Bowls and made 7 straight conference championship games to win their division again is really going out on a limb. But you know what? Seeing Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift get married inspired me to really believe in the Chiefs this year, especially after that embarrassing Super Bowl loss last year to my favorite team. Again, it's the usual cast of characters. As long as the Chiefs have Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, they're gonna be liable to win double-digit games. And I understand that his numbers haven't been as good the last couple years as they were when he first broke into the league, and Kelce is obviously older, but I just think that, Mahomes is still the best guy. He's still the best quarterback in terms of controlling the game, expanding the game, and I don't know if they'll be quite as lucky to be 15-2, but to be honest with you, I don't even know if the Chiefs want to win 15 games again, because the last 2 seasons that they've won 15 games in the regular season, they ended up getting blown out in the Super Bowl those years. But I still think that this is going to be obviously the big bad team to beat, and I'm going to think that until one of these teams with Lamar or Allen or Burrow, and I know Burrow beat them once, but then the Chiefs took it back the next year, and the Bengals haven't been in the playoffs for 2 years. The Chiefs, they've beat the Ravens in the AFC Championship a couple years ago, and they beat the Bills. They're 4-0 versus Josh Allen and the Bills. And, for all the talk about parity and diversity in the NFL, the AFC for the last 25 years has been pretty much a 4 or 5 quarterback conference. Brady, Peyton, Roethlisberger, Mahomes. Those are really the big, those 4 guys make up the vast majority of the AFC Super Bowl appearances in the last 25 years, in the last quarter century. So it's not like the NFC where teams seem to play musical chairs. The AFC is, you can basically guarantee that the Chiefs are going to be in the mix. So as long as they got Mahomes, they still got Andy Reid, although Mahomes haters, I think, are kind of playing big revisionist history on Andy Reid's career to try and discredit Mahomes. But as long as they got Mahomes under center, they're going to be set. And I know Rashee Rice is going to be suspended, but Xavier Worthy showed flashes. Kelce, I think, will have a bounce back year. and then he'll retire after this year is over so he can have full-time marital sex with Taylor Swift. Defensively, are they going to be good? This is just one last thing before I stop talking about Kansas City. When it comes to the Chiefs, you can never look at raw points per game when you're evaluating their defense. And I hate saying this because a lot of Mahomes detractors are like, well, he's had elite defenses. He's had one truly elite defense in his 7 years as a starter, and that was in 2023. Okay? Last year, they were 13th in points allowed per drive, but they were really well ranked in points allowed. That's because they're the best team in the league at controlling the ball. So their scores are going to be lower. So you can't look at their raw points or points allowed to judge the defense. You have to look at their defense on an efficiency metric. I expect their defense to be about average, to be in that 11 to 15 range in points allowed per drive, which is what they've been for a lot of seasons in Mahomes' career. But you just, with the Chiefs, and everyone's like the refs, blah, whatever, I think they're going to finish 14-3. And I think one of those wins will be their annual useless game at the end of the year when they've already locked up the 1 seed. They'll lose to the Raiders, but their backup quarterbacks will lose. This year, and previous years, it was Blaine Gabbert. Last year was Carson Wentz. This year, that honor will go to Gardner Minshew. But I think the Chiefs, they're going to be 14-3, and they'll win the AFC West. But it's not going to be a complete runaway because I think the Chargers are going to be really good this year. I think, in fact, the Chargers will actually start out the season better than the Kansas City Chiefs, even though they'll lose to Kansas City in the opener. I have the Chargers at one point ripping off 11 wins in a row to go 11-1 before ending the season really poorly, losing 4 out of their last 5 to finish 12-5. But I think the Jim Harbaugh formula is proven. It's proven that if you have a great defense and you have a good quarterback and you run the ball, then you'll probably win 11 plus games. And the Chargers last year, that's what they did. The big problem with the Chargers, and we can talk all about Justin Herbert and the fact that he's now having, most likely, I should say, having premarital sex with Madison Bear, which is a very, very disturbing line of news. But really, with Herbert, we know that he's a good regular season quarterback, and as he proved last year, that he can win games, a lot of games, and make the playoffs with Harbaugh. But with Herbert, it's going to be, he's got to get back to the playoffs to fix that postseason. Last year throwing 4 interceptions versus the Texans. Fortunately for Herbert, only about 30 people were watching that game, but I was one of those people, and I'm bringing it up now. His 2 playoff games have been horrific. They haven't won a playoff game with him yet, entering his 6th year. So that's the whole debate with the Chargers. But to me, there's really no debate. Herbert in the regular season is one of the better quarterbacks in the league. Again, similar to kind of like Matthew Stafford when Stafford was in Detroit. But the Chargers should once again have a very good defense, which Harbaugh teams in the NFL always seem to have somehow. So I think that'll be enough to get them to 12-5 and a wild card spot. But after that, it's basically we have to see Justin Herbert finally play well in a playoff game before I believe in them going on any sort of run to a Super Bowl or a conference championship. Next up, we have the Denver Broncos. And just like the LA Chargers, I have the Broncos going 12-5 this year. And maybe I'm a little bit too bullish on the Broncos, but I feel like I just looked at their schedule. I go game by game at their schedule, and I just say to myself, they have a lot of winnable games. And that's the whole point of these predictions. And once again, much like with a lot of these teams, at any point in the NFL, and I'm going to spit some game for you here, at any point in NFL history, there are usually 3 or 4 teams that have an elite quarterback. They're set at quarterback. Then you got about 10 or 12 other teams who have a good quarterback, but secretly, if they could get better at the position, they would. And then you have a bunch of other teams that are actively looking for quarterbacks. But basically what I'm trying to say is that NFL teams, unless you have an elite quarterback, you're always looking for a quarterback. And right now, with the Broncos, they were in that wilderness after Peyton retired for the better part of a decade. They were looking for their quarterback. They couldn't seem to find one. And then last year, Bo Nix came around, the 40-year-old rookie, and he had a very good rookie season. He had some lumps, but he got better as the season went on. And they made the playoffs. They got blown out by the Bills, but still, they made the playoffs for the first time in almost a decade. And I think they'll find that way. I think playing the AFC South obviously will help them increase their win total. But I'm not completely sold on Bo Nix. I'm just not. I know that I'm not saying he's a bum, and he was better than I thought he would be as a rookie, but I just don't know. I don't really know about him. I'm kind of undecided about Bo Nix. I don't know yet whether he's a guy that is a game manager or he is a game changer. I don't know what category he falls into yet, which is both a good and a bad thing for the Broncos because, again, for the last decade or so, they've had nothing but shitty quarterback play. And so for the first time, there's kind of a question as to whether or not, hey, maybe this quarterback we have, he could actually be really good. And so at this point, I'm not saying he wouldn't be very good, but I just have certain reservations about him. I don't know what it is. Maybe I just feel like his ceiling, he's already kind of reached his ceiling physically. I don't know, but I still think the Broncos, they have still a good team. They have one of the best defensive players in the league, and Pat Surtain, obviously, as well as a bunch of other good players. So they have a very good defense, and that should help carry them to some wins. But I think they'll finish 12-5, which might be a little bit of just a little bit overrating them. But I think Bo Nix will have a solid season again. But overall, I'm still undecided on how good Bo Nix actually is. But we'll figure that. That's the beauty of sports, is that you watch it play out on the field. And finally, we have the Las Vegas Raiders, and I am hating the Raiders now because their owner is that cheating piece of shit Tom Brady. And it's ironic that the Raiders, in Tom Brady's first official game as an owner, are playing on the road in New England because that's where Tom Brady's fucking fraudulent legacy started, against the Raiders with the tuck rule all those years ago. But overall, I think even though Geno Smith is a good quarterback, I just think their defense is horrendous outside of Max Crosby, and I think this is going to be another Raiders team that is forgettable, much like they've been since like 2002, basically. They made the playoffs a couple times, only twice in the last 25 years, and I hope because Tom Brady's involved, I hope that their team sucks, because I love seeing Tom Brady lose in any capacity. Maybe I'm underrating them, maybe I'm letting my Brady hatred sway my opinion on this, but I just think that I think it felt like with the Seahawks, Geno Smith had a good structure there. He had some good structure there in Seattle, because when he became the starter, it was there with Pete Carroll, and there was some consistency and structure. And now I just feel like Geno Smith, he's going into a situation where the team's been horrible for so many years, and there's a lot of disarray. And is Ashton Genty, is a running back, is he really going to be a major difference? I don't know, but I don't think so. I think that we're going to find out if Geno Smith can actually how he does with a horrible team. And I think it's going to be similar to how he did with the Jets early in his career. I have them going 4-13. We move over to the NFC, and we're going to start with the NFC East and my beloved Eagles. And this was a very, very difficult prediction for me to make, because I had to try and temper my expectations when I was going through the game by game. Basically, with the Eagles, everybody says they're a super team. I'm looking at this team, and I think, as an Eagles fan, I think they're the best team in the league. They have an elite quarterback. I know people disagree with that, but they have an elite quarterback. Saquon Barkley was the best running back in the league last year. They have Dallas Goedert. They got A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith. They have a great offensive line. Jalen Carter along the defensive line. Nolan Smith should be better. Zach Braun. Jahad Campbell's a rookie. Nakobe Dean is going to be coming back from injury. We got, I think really the only maybe semi-weakness is maybe linebackers. But other than that, this team is fucking loaded. But I do think the schedule is not kind, because they gave us the Chiefs and the Bills, and both those games are on the road, and I think we'll take an L in both of those games. And also, all the losses I have the Eagles this year are teams that historically in the regular season, on the road at Dallas, that's always been a toss-up game in recent memory, so I have them losing that one. And the other one is Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay is honestly, if you were going to ask me who is the Eagles' biggest threat in the NFC, a lot of people might say the Cowboys, or they might say the 49ers, or they might say even Washington. But honestly, I think it's the Buccaneers. The Buccaneers, they're the team that in the last 3 or 4 years has really given the Eagles a shitload of trouble, and we have to play them on the road again this year. So I think, much like last year, the Eagles will get off to a slow start, and that will end up costing them the 1 seed. But I think in the end of the day, we'll hit our stride and we'll end up winning 13 or so games again. This team is built for the playoffs. We saw that last year. We saw that 2 of the last 3 years. My only concern again, though, is if we have to run into Tampa Bay, that would be my one holdup, because Tampa Bay seems to have our number. Just one of those things, kind of like how the Dolphins every year during the Brady Belichick era, they would always beat New England, or almost always beat New England in Miami for some reason. It's just one of those somewhat unexplainable things. And that's what I have going on here with the Eagles. Eagles, but still, they're the best team in the league, even if they might not be the best team record-wise. I think the strength of schedule will have a lot to do with that. Thanks, NFL, for fucking us with this super difficult strength of schedule, dicks. Next up, we got the Dallas Cowboys, a team that has been living in 1995 for the last 30 years. They got rid of Mike McCarthy. They hired Brian Schottenheimer, who is a perfect puppet head coach for Jerry Jones, very much similar to Jason Garrett. Although, at least with Jason Garrett, he actually had some history of success as a coordinator before the Cowboys hired him from within. Brian Schottenheimer has never really, his offenses, and he's been around for a while, his offenses have never really been that good. So that's not great. But, you know, they have the biggest story with the Cowboys, because there's always some sort of fucking drama with these pieces of shit, is, you know, are they going to be able to sign Micah Parsons? And honestly, I'm like, who really cares? Because with or without Micah Parsons, they're not going to beat the Eagles, and it doesn't matter. But, you know, Micah Parsons, another weirdo. He's going to, whether or not he does sign, he'll probably end up signing, because you're not going to leave all that money on the table. But either way, you know, we know the story with the Cowboys. They have talent. Dak Prescott's a good regular season quarterback. They're going to beat up on bad teams. CeeDee Lamb is arguably the best receiver in the league, you know, and obviously Micah Parsons is one of the better defensive players in the league. So they got some talent, they got some big names, but this is, I don't see how this is going to be any different than your typical underachieving Cowboys team come playoff time that ends up shitting the bed. I think they have enough talent to beat on bad teams in the regular season to where they'll finish, you know, 11-6. That's where I have them finishing. But I'll fucking eat a cow. I will eat a live cow on my channel if the Dallas Cowboys make the conference championship game this year. That is a guarantee. You can record it. And you know what? As I'm recording this, maybe Micah Parsons won't even be with the Cowboys. Maybe he'll be traded away. I don't know. But either way, it doesn't really move the needle for me. Next up, we have Washington, and I'm not scared of Washington. I know they had their great season last year, that out of nowhere run with Jaden Daniels, and they finally made it back to conference championship game where the Eagles proceeded to stick their entire foot up the Commanders' ass and beat them 55-23. And but you know, Jaden Daniels, very talented, very good young quarterback. They finally re-signed Terry McLaurin. You know, they signed Von Miller, Bobby Wagner, you know, the whole retirement home there, Marshawn Lattimore. You know, a lot of these guys are almost eligible for AARP. Their defense was their big Achilles heel last year. And it's just I don't know, Washington, it's like they always do this. They always have this where they have one good year, like once every 5 or 6 years, and then they regress. And I understand Dan Snyder's gone, I get that, but at the end of the day, Dan Snyder, for as big of a douchebag and evil person as he wasn't the one on the field all those years, right? So I just feel like even with Jaden Daniels and even with you know, the people coming back, I feel like they're due for regression, and I'm just not afraid of Washington. I've never been afraid. For me as an Eagles fan, the NFC East, when it comes to talking shit and when it comes to actual rivals, Washington's always felt like an outsider. It's always been the Eagles, Cowboys, and Giants. Like, to me, those are like the three. The Washington is kind of like this weird satellite that kind of just comes into orbit once every 5 or 6 years, where they feel involved and then they disappear again. And I feel like because Jaden Daniels is very good, and they should have a very good offense again, that they'll still have a winning record, but I have them going 9-8. I just do. I just think their defense is terrible, and they're going to go 9-8 again. And finally, no surprise here, the fourth place and last place team I have is the New York Giants, which is nothing new. The Giants, ever since that fluke Super Bowl win in 2011, over the last 13 seasons, they have one playoff win. That's it. Over the last 13 seasons, the New York Giants, which we are frequently told is a blue blood franchise, has one playoff win and 2 playoff appearances in the last 13 years. Okay? And going back to 1991, they have those 2 Florida Marlin ass title runs and really nothing else, right? This is a team, like, I hate to, actually I say I hate, I don't hate doing it. The Giants, if you look at their winning percentage as a franchise since the Super Bowl era began, they're one of the worst teams in the league. They're a team that they had, you know, their best success, their most successful run was with Parcells and with Belichick there and Lawrence Taylor and all those guys in the mid 80s. So they had a good 5-year run there in the 80s, and that gets brought up up all the time, but I try my best not to talk about the past with the Giants, but there's really nothing to talk about the current Giants. We all know they suck. They drafted Jackson Dart. They have Russell Wilson. They have Jameis Winston at quarterback. I don't know. They're just not intimidating. They have Dexter Lawrence, who's a great player, but really, again, they're just like the Browns. They got one great player in Dexter Lawrence, but he plays in a position that isn't the most impactful position, so they end up losing a shitload of games anyway. Now, maybe Russell Wilson will turn back the clock, but what's most likely going to happen is Wilson will end up getting benched probably by week 6 or 7, and then maybe Jameis will play a game or two for a little bit, and then eventually they'll get around to Jackson Dart. But Brian Daboll's a fucking terrible coach, and the only sort of success that he had as Giants coach was his first year when he just spammed Daniel Jones running the ball, and that caught defenses off guard for a bit because they weren't used to seeing a white guy run that fast. But basically, I just had the Giants going 4-13. They're a bottom feeder team. They suck. Their franchise history is overrated. They have a terrible franchise history, and they should really be ashamed of themselves, and their fans should really be ashamed of themselves. Moving on to the NFC North, no surprise, I picked the Detroit Lions, who had the best record in the league last year, along with Kansas City. The best record in the NFC, rather, last year. They were the 1 seed in the NFC, and they blew it at home, as the Lions are wont to do. But they still have all that talent. Jared Goff, I still obviously have my doubts about him when it comes to the postseason and in big moments, but he has been one of the best quarterbacks in the league in the last couple seasons in the regular season. And when you're getting really good, when you're getting really productive quarterback play, and you have a dynamic back like Jahmyr Gibbs, and you have a good offensive line, and you have such a dynamic offense like the Lions do, you're going to win a lot of games. Defensively, they're getting Aiden Hutchinson back. Defensively is their weakness, much like it was last year when they were super injured on a lot of places. But I think push comes to shove, I think this team, they're not going to be as good as last year's rendition, and that's just because teams who win 15 or more games always regress the year after a little bit in the win column. That's just how it goes. That's just how the law of averages works. So I think that the Lions, they might not have as good of a record as they did last year. And also, don't forget Amon-Ra St. Brown. This is a team that's loaded offensively everywhere, and everyone loves Dan Campbell. Everyone loves playing for Dan Campbell. So I think the Lions, they're going to finish 12-5. I think they'll finish 12-5, and they'll get a wild card spot. And maybe, who knows? Maybe they'll end up doing better than they did last year in the playoffs. I mean, it's hard to do any worse than they did last year in the playoffs with that embarrassing home loss to Washington, but we'll see. I think they're still going to be good. Defensively, though, is their biggest question, but obviously the return of Aiden Hutchinson should help with that, but they still have a lot of question marks at all the other spots on their defense. Now we get to the Green Bay Packers, and as I'm recording this, it's not official, but the Packers they've dipped their hand in the Micah Parsons pie, so to speak, that sounds kind of disgusting now that I say it out loud, but I already said it. I can't take anything. I can't take it back now. So by the time it depends. If they get Micah Parsons, I don't think Micah Parsons is the difference between them winning and losing a Super Bowl. It might bump their win total up by 1 or 2 maybe, but I don't think it's going to be a drastic move the needle thing. That's if they do get Micah Parsons, which they might possibly. At the moment I'm recording this, they do not have him. But either way, with the Packers, they're going to be, it's all about Jordan Love. Jordan Love, in his career thus far, he's been inconsistent. He's had really great moments and also really bad moments, but he doesn't ever really feel like, I don't know, I'm not afraid to play against Jordan Love. He's not a guy like when the Eagles were playing against him last year, like I wasn't scared of Jordan Love. I wasn't like, oh my God, we got to play against Jordan Love. He doesn't really instill fear in you like that. So although he's a good player, as I've said many times, he's the Jeff Garcia in the Joe Montana, Steve Young, Jeff Garcia trope there. But there is one thing for Packers fans to watch out for, and that is this is going to be Jordan Love's 6th season in the NFL. Brett Favre won his only ring in his 6th season, and Aaron Rodgers won his only ring in his 6th season. So maybe the devil will rear his head again to complete the 666 trilogy for Packers fans, and somehow the Packers, Jordan Love goes on to become a first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback with only 1 ring, and this is the year that they get that 1 ring, they get it out of the way, and to complete the 666 trilogy. I think overall, though, I think the Packers, they're going to be a 10-7 type of team, a good team, not a championship caliber team, at least until they get some, bigger names on offense around Jordan Love in there. In 3rd place, we have the Minnesota Vikings, and Minnesota was definitely one of the biggest surprises last year. I had them going, I think, 2-15, and they ended up winning 14 games, but such is life. They won 14 games. They were 14-2 going into the final week of the season, and they didn't even win the division. Can you believe that? They're like the 2010 Seahawks won their division, winning 7 games, and the Vikings last year couldn't win their division with 14 wins, and they ended up going one and done in the playoffs versus the Rams too. But that was Sam Darnold basically coming back to life as Sam Darnold. That Sam Darnold was why I was so low on the Vikings last year, but he ended up having one of the greatest out of nowhere seasons ever. Although in retrospect, I don't know if it was really an out of nowhere season, because the Vikings have elite skill position players with Justin Jefferson, obviously Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson. They got some big names there. And so the question is going to be JJ McCarthy. Is JJ McCarthy, is he the real deal or not? The NFL does have a history of quarterbacks from Michigan with cheating scandals, and JJ McCarthy is picking up that mantle from Tom Brady. I don't know if he'll have the same luck that Tom Brady had, but I would say overall that it's going to come down mostly to JJ McCarthy. They might not try to put it all on JJ McCarthy's shoulders, but to be honest with you, that's what they tried to do, I think, last year with Sam Darnold. And guess what? It ended up working for a time, but at the end of the day, you are who you are. And in the biggest moments, Sam Darnold crapped his pants, and the Vikings did what they usually do, which is disappoint. The Vikings are by far the most successful team left that does not have a Super Bowl trophy on their mantle, and I think that's going to continue this year. I have the Vikings finishing 8-9. They're just, I don't know, there's something missing. I'm not a believer in JJ McCarthy, although he basically is walking into the greatest situation that any young quarterback has walked into in recent memory. So I think the Vikings will be 8-9, but who knows? Maybe I'm underestimating them again. I don't know, but we all know they're not going to win the Super Bowl because they live to disappoint people. That's just what they do. And finally, at the bottom, I have the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears. And honestly, this is really just mostly to do with Caleb Williams. Again, a lot of this stuff, it sounds repetitive. I get it, but it's really all about quarterback. And the reason they got Caleb Williams in the first place was because they drafted high. They went all in on Justin Fields, and he sucked. And then they went all in on Caleb Williams, and he had a very, very inconsistent rookie season, and they're paying Tyson Badger $10 million to be their shitty backup quarterback. I mean, all the other shit they do with their roster is really irrelevant if Caleb Williams doesn't pan out. That's it. That's all I have to say. That's the preview, Like, the biggest thing with Caleb Williams coming out of college was that he held on to the ball too long, trying to make home run plays, and he can't read defenses quickly, doesn't go through his progressions quickly, and that was also a flaw of Justin Fields. Now, I was a lot more bullish on Caleb Williams in college, but I also was disappointed. He took way too many sacks. He didn't throw a lot of interceptions, but he also didn't make nearly as many big plays as he should have, and I thought he was going to have the season that Jaden Daniels had as a rookie, and that didn't come to pass. So, I don't know. I feel like, Ben Johnson's there, obviously. He's supposed to be an offensive genius. He helped, I guess, turn Jared Goff's career around again, just like with Sean McVay. I don't know. But I'll say this, and I said this in my last video, if Caleb Williams is still struggling for the first 5 or 6 games this season, then it might be time to pull the plug. And that might seem a little bit harsh, but that's true. And again, history says yes. Again, I've said it many years. It's basically illegal for the Chicago Bears to have a good quarterback. And so that's why I think the Bears are going to end up going 5-12 and once again having another forgettable season. Basically, for the Chicago Bears, unless they have a historically great defense, their franchise doesn't win. They just don't win. Unless they have a historically great defense, they don't win because they don't have any fucking offense. They've never had any offense since like the mid-80s, since fucking Walter Payton was there. Moving on now to the NFC South, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who have won the division for the last 4 years, including each of the last 2 seasons without Tom Brady at quarterback, which is weird because I was told for so long that Tom Brady was the second coming of Jesus Christ and he was irreplaceable, and the Buccaneers in each of the last 2 years have had a better record than they had in Tom Brady's last year, despite basically having the same personnel and the same head coach. Wow, that is so interesting. The Buccaneers are driven by Baker Mayfield, who is another one of these reclamation projects, and we all know the story of Baker Mayfield by now. He was the first overall pick with Cleveland. Actually had some good years with Cleveland, but then he got hurt, sucked, then got traded to Carolina, then got traded to the Rams, then he went to the Buccaneers as kind of like his last stand, and in the last 2 seasons, he's been one of the better quarterbacks in the league, although he still is prone to interceptions, but he's fun to watch. But you look at it, they're getting Chris Godwin back from injury. Mike Evans is always a constant there. Bucky Irving, I just like saying that name. He's at running back. defensively, Vita Vea, you got Levante David is back in the fold. This is a team that, and I say this because they always seem to beat the Eagles, they are a team that maybe I'm more bullish on them, but, I think this is a very, very talented team that they have the potential to go to the conference championship game, I think, in my opinion. I'm not saying they will, but, last year, they had one terrible fumble in their playoff game. They had like one bad play, and that was really what stopped them from advancing in the playoffs last year. But they have everything that they need to really make a deep run, and I think that combined with them being in a very bad division, that doesn't hurt as well. I think this is the first time, I'm going to say, since 2021 where they actually win the division pretty handily. I think they're going to go 12-5, and they're going to be one of the better offenses in the league again. Their only concern is, defensively, are they going to be able to pick it up defensively? But Baker Mayfield should be in store for another 30-plus season. He's just entertaining and fun to watch, so I always enjoy watching Baker Mayfield play. And I think the Buccaneers will be 12-5. I think they're going to be very good. Moving on now to the Atlanta Falcons. Fuck the Falcons for blowing that 25-point lead in the Super Bowl. I still hate you and your fucking franchise. Although from the little I did see of Michael Penix, not Penis, Penix last year after they benched Kirk Cousins, I think he's going to be good, but I don't know if this is going to be the year, because essentially this is essentially last year for Penix was like a redshirt year, and this is really like his rookie season. I just think the Falcons defensively, they suck, and Drake London's a good receiver, and Bijan Robinson is a good running back, and Penix showed some potential, but again, I've said this many times, it seems like no matter who the quarterback is for the Falcons, especially when Matt Ryan was there for all those years, it's always like no matter how good their offense is, no matter what they do offensively, their defense is always dog shit. They don't have a defense to fall back on. So I could actually see this year's Falcons being similar to like what last year's Bengals were, a team that has a very good offense. Penix has a very good season, and they still lose because their defense is very, very bad. I think they're going to end up going 8-9, which sounds about right, but I think that I think Penix is the right answer at quarterback, but I just think, I think they're going to have to hit on a couple more draft picks before I start taking the Falcons seriously as a contender in the NFC again. And also prepare yourselves for Kyle Pitts' fourth breakout year. He might get over 400 yards this year, which is saying a lot. Moving on now to the Panthers, who are in third. The only reason they're not in last place is because the team behind them might be the worst team in the league. So this is more about just how horrible the bottom half of the division is than the Panthers getting better. I know that, again, it always rests on the quarterback. They invested the first overall pick in Bryce Young, had a terrible rookie year, was terrible last year, got benched for Andy Dalton, came back and played better at the end of the season. And a lot of people seem to say, hey, well, that's going to be what jumpstarts Bryce Young's career. Everybody who follows me and watches my channel knows that I've never been a fan of Bryce Young. He just doesn't have the tools and the measurables. He just doesn't have the physical stuff to me to be a good NFL quarterback. I have no idea how he went first overall. And I think he is who he is. I think that he might have his best season yet, but that the bar is the floor. A couple good games last year when there's no pressure on you and your team's already out of the playoffs, that doesn't really mean anything to me. So I think as long as they're starting Bryce Young, they're not a threat. And they're going to win probably 5 games, but that's largely due to the division they play in. They might get a couple cheap wins from their division, but overall, this is a team to me that they're not going to be taken seriously until they get a new quarterback, until they find a new quarterback in the draft. Perhaps Arch Manning, maybe, in the future? Who knows? And finally, in fourth place, we have the New Orleans Saints. All you need to know about the Saints is that their starting quarterback is Spencer Rattler. That's right. Spencer Rattler is their starting opening day quarterback. This is a guy who is not a good NFL quarterback, but he kind of looks like Patrick Mahomes from 100 yards away. So the Saints said, what the hell? Let's put him in there. Let's make him the starter. They drafted a guy, Tyler Shuck is his name, even though his last name looks like Show. It's pronounced Shuck, I believe. That alone means that he's going to be terrible. Obviously, one of the biggest surprises of the offseason was that Derek Carr retired, and for all the jokes that Derek Carr has gotten as being, a great mediocre quarterback, he is Joe Montana compared to the rest of the guys on this roster. And this is a team, the Saints, for all those years, they kept pushing the salary cap back and back and back, when they were trying to compete for titles towards the end of the Drew Brees era. Well, the Roosters, the Chickens, whatever that fucking saying is, the Chickens are coming home to roost now with a salary cap. They're going to be in salary cap hell. Don't have a quarterback. They really just don't don't have a lot of talent. This is a horrible team. I have them winning 3 games, going 3-14. They might not even get that. I would be stunned if Rattler starts more than 8 games this year. I really do. I just think he's just not good. At least for, I'll throw him a bone. At least he actually is somewhat exciting to watch, though. At least there's different types of quarterbacks. He's a bad quarterback, but he's not a boring bad quarterback. He's kind of like a Ryan Fitzpatrick, if you will, which actually that would be a godsend for the Saints if he could be as good as Ryan Fitzpatrick, which is saying a lot for how bad the situation is. But like I said, the Saints are going 3-14, and just like the Panthers, who knows, maybe Arch Manning will be their pick in the draft. If not this year, then next year, coming back home to where his grandfather is a legend. Finally, the NFC West, this was the biggest surprise last year, and that was that the 49ers went from being a dominant team to a 6-11 team that was riddled with injuries. And so this entire prediction and this whole conference prediction, a lot of this NFC West prediction just depends on how much faith do you have in the 49ers regaining their place in the NFL hierarchy with all these big names back. I think that they're going to be bouncing back because this is a team, and this has been talked about a lot, but this team ever since 1999, or really ever since 2003, is literally either dog shit or a title contender. There's no in between with these guys. So it's not like, oh, maybe they'll be 10-7 or 9-8. No, it's these guys are either 14 wins or they're 6-11 and missing the playoffs. And even Kyle Shanahan's career, this is going to be his 9th year as head coach, and in his first 8 seasons, he missed the playoffs 4 times, and he also made 4 NFC Championship games and 2 Super Bowls. So I think with all their guys back, with all their horses back, I think the 49ers will bounce back this year. I have them going 14-3, and largely, I don't understand, honestly, why people think Brock Purdy sucks. And I've said this before, like, I'm not sitting here saying that Brock Purdy is not helped by Shanahan getting guys open in the scheme, but again, Brock Purdy saved this franchise from the Trey Lance trade debacle. That's one of the worst draft trades in sports history, one of the worst draft picks in sports history, and the 49ers really felt no repercussions from it because they lucked into Brock Purdy. And, I just think Brock Purdy really, next to Jalen Hurts, probably might be the most disrespected quarterback in the league to me. He doesn't have a big arm, but he can move around. I know people don't think he can because he's kind of a doofus. He's a doofy looking white guy, but he can move around. He doesn't have a super strong arm, but he throws the ball downfield a lot. So I think I enjoy watching him play. I think he's very good. So I have more faith in the 49ers than a lot of other people do. In second place, I have the LA Rams. Now, the LA Rams were the team that by far really gave the Eagles the largest run for their money. That makes no sense. The biggest run for their money in the playoffs last year. They were about 13 or 14 yards away from beating the Eagles. I haven't forgotten about that. But the question with the Rams is all about Matthew Stafford's health. And I made jokes about it, Matthew Stafford is actually dead, and they're doing a Weekend at Bernie's type of thing with him where they're dragging out his corpse and saying, see, everything's okay. But apparently he has like serious back issues. He unironically, and this is not joking, he might unironically need to take back shots. That's not funny, but it is funny. It is funny because it's a sexual thing and it's funny, and I'm immature. But anyway, back to the football. If they have Stafford, the one thing about the Rams the last couple years with Stafford, they kind of start slow, but in the second half of the season, Stafford has started to pick up his game, particularly after their bye weeks. And I think that really, Stafford, I think he's going to be a guy, a very interesting legacy. He's kind of like if Eli Manning, he's better than Eli Manning, but he's kind of like the closest thing, like if Eli Manning had 1 ring instead of 2. And it's weird, like if Matthew Stafford were to somehow stumble ass backwards into a 2nd ring with the Rams, then things, I think, the Hall of Fame discussions, some people already have him in the Hall of Fame. I don't personally. I think he's a Hall of very good quarterback. But, if he were to get a 2nd ring, then it would become a lot more complicated. But either way, and I think the Rams, obviously with Jared Verse and Byron Young, they have a lot of talent. Puka Nacua, obviously. They added Devontae Adams, Kyron Williams. There's a lot of talent here. Stafford he's one of the better quarterbacks in the league. But also at Stafford, you're also going to get a couple games every year where he just doesn't have it for whatever reason. And I think that's going to end up knocking the Rams down to 12-5 and a wild card spot, very similar to what they've been the last couple years. I will say this about Stafford. He has had trouble making the playoffs consistently in his career, but once he's gotten there, his playoff numbers have been great. So if he's one of those guys where if he can get into the playoffs, if the Rams Rams can get into the postseason, they are going to be a tough out. Moving on to team number 3, it's the Arizona Cardinals. And this is, again, it all comes back to your quarterback. It's all about, do you believe in Kyler Murray or not? We're about to go into year 7 for Kyler Murray already, which is going by very, very quickly. And it just seemed as though with Kyler Murray that maybe he was turning the corner in 2021, in the first half of 2021, when the Cardinals were undefeated, and then that kind of went down, and then he had that knee injury, and a couple years there were kind of like a wash, and then they drafted Marvin Harrison Jr. last year, and he's supposed to be this generational prospect. Had a disappointing rookie season, but the potential is still there, obviously, for him to become a great player. I look at the Cardinals and I'm like, they just, again, I don't really know how much of it. This is a situation where the team around Kyler is not great, but you're the first overall pick. If you're picked first overall, you're supposed to be able to elevate mediocre rosters. So the fact that the Cardinals, so that becomes one of these things where it's like, oh, is Kyler Murray, he doesn't, the teams around him are bad and mediocre, so that's why he's had mediocre success, when really it's more like, if you're really that guy, if you're an elite quarterback, you should be able to be better than what Kyler Murray has been. And he just isn't. And so I think, and I've said this for years now, I think Kyler Murray isn't the guy. They gave him that big contract a couple years ago, with the Xbox clause about you can't play video games and all that shit. He just, he gets worse as the year goes on. He's obviously always going to be an injury risk because of his size. He has obviously great arm talent. He's going to have great highlight plays, but he just isn't able to win games, and he just isn't a consistent enough quarterback, especially as somebody who is a first overall pick. And, he's lucky that he plays in Arizona instead of a big market like New York or LA, because he's allowed to just be mediocre as shit in Arizona without anybody giving a crap, because nobody gives a shit about Arizona. So overall, I think it's going to be more of the same for the Cardinals this year. I think it's going to be a 7-10 season where they miss the playoffs. And then finally, we get to the Seattle Seahawks, who we have officially begun the Sam Darnold era. There's no way this can go poorly, right? Giving a guy who was dog shit for his career a massive contract thanks to one fluke year that he had in a great situation with a great skill players. Well, guess what? All those great skill players, there's no Justin Jefferson on the Seahawks, okay? You're not going to be playing in a dome. And even with all those great circumstances offensively around him last year, in the big moments, Sam Darnold still shit his pants in the final week of the season and in the playoff game. So really, you're getting him. You got rid of Geno Smith and you replaced him with Sam Darnold. You're replacing one failed ex-Jets quarterback reclamation project with another. I think the Seahawks will be looking for a quarterback in the draft after this year. I can't wait for Darnold to go back to throwing like 15 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. This just, this isn't a good team, and they're just a team that I think that they're going to finish probably 6-11 around there. Maybe not the worst team in the league, but just the worst type of team where they suck and they're boring. They're boring and they suck. That's the worst team possible, and I think that the Seahawks, that's what we're going to see from the Seahawks. And finally, after all the 32 team reviews, we get to my official predictions. You see here in the AFC, I have Buffalo, Baltimore, Houston, Kansas City winning their divisions. I have Cincinnati, the Chargers, and Denver snatching the wild card spots. In the NFC, I have Philadelphia, Detroit, Tampa Bay, and San Francisco winning their divisions, with Dallas, Green Bay, and the Rams snatching up playoff spots. Not a ton of surprises there, but then we get to my awards. I think the MVP will be Joe Burrow. The media seems desperate to give this guy an MVP, and that's not to say he won't have a great season, because he is an elite quarterback, but if he was in MVP talks last year when the Bengals missed the playoffs, I really think if he can have somewhat even close to similar numbers as he had last year with the Bengals making the playoffs, not even winning their division, but just making the playoffs, I think the media will give him the award. My offensive player of the year, I think, is going to be Lamar Jackson. I think that, surprisingly, despite having 3 first-team All-Pros and 2 MVPs, Lamar has not won an offensive player of the year award, and I think the voters will kind of give him this somewhat as a makeup award for not giving him MVP last year. And that might sound dumb and stupid, but this is really how the voters work a lot of times in sports. They get very sentimental and shit like that. Defensive player of the year, I expect Cleveland to be terrible again, but for my money, I would say Myles Garrett. Ever since Aaron Donald retired, I think Myles Garrett is now the best defensive player in the league, and so therefore it's really, he's probably not going to win defensive player of the year, but I think a lot of teams, a lot of people, if they could pick any defensive player currently playing to start a franchise with, I think a lot of them would pick Myles Garrett because he's smack dab in his prime or at his peak, and so I just went with the best player here. in Myles Garrett. Offensive Rookie of the Year, I think it's going to be Cam Ward. I think that he's going to be very good in the NFL. He seems to have the right stuff. There are certain guys who just have it, and he's one of those guys for me, which again, this isn't really going out on a limb because he was the first overall pick, but I think he's going to win. Now, my Defensive Rookie of the Year selection is kind of going out on a limb because he was a second round pick, and the answer is Mike Green. Now, some of you might not even know who the hell Mike Green is. He plays for the Baltimore Ravens. He was supremely talented at Marshall, but with Mike Green, he had some off-field problems, to put it lightly. But the fact is, and I certainly don't like him as a person, but I think he's going to be another one of those guys who the talent is insane. We already saw some flashes of that in the preseason. I think he's really going to surprise some guys. And also, this isn't necessarily a great rookie class defensively, or at least it's not hyped up to be a great rookie class defensively. So I went with a little bit of a surprise pick there, but I think Mike Green is really going to surprise some people. He's going to play, he's going to have his opportunities, so I think he's going to do very well. I think he'll win that award. Comeback Player of the Year, I think it'll be Christian McCaffrey. Every time this guy has been healthy, which has always been the biggest if, but every time he has been healthy in his career, he's put up all pro numbers. And whatever, I'm just going to flip a coin and say he's going to be healthy, and him being healthy is going to be a big reason why the 49ers are back to being elite. So that was that. And I also think Kyle Shanahan hasn't won a Coach of the Year award yet in his career, but I do believe that he will finally get it this year because of the bounce back by the 49ers. And with the same team, I don't know. I mean, you never know with Coach of the Year. It's almost always either a first-year coach or a team that was dog shit the year before. It's very rarely given to a coach with the best record in the league on a good team. So I might be going against type there, but I do think that Shanahan will win Coach of the Year. But my dark horse candidate is going to be Todd Bowles. That's my dark horse candidate for Coach of the Year is Todd Bowles in Tampa Bay, but I think Kyle Shanahan will get it. And finally, we get to the conference championship games and the Super Bowl. That's right, I am picking Baltimore to upset Kansas City in the AFC Championship game. I don't see the Chiefs making 4 straight Super Bowls and 6 out of the last 7 Super Bowls. I just don't. I think this is the year where Baltimore might get just enough breaks to go their way to finally get through. It'll be a similar equivalent to the Colts in 2006 getting through the Patriots finally, who at that time had 3 rings, and the Chiefs currently have 3 rings with the Mahomes era, the current dynasty. It won't be the end of the Chiefs dynasty. It'll be a roadblock, but this will be Baltimore's year to get to the Super Bowl, in my opinion. In the NFC Championship, I think we're going to have a rematch of a couple years ago, only this time there won't be any injuries to Brock Purdy. I think we're going to get Philadelphia, San Francisco NFC Championship game rematch from 2022, and I think the Eagles are going to win it. I said it before, and I think a lot of people would agree with me. I think the Eagles have the best team in the league, and it's no surprise that I think in Super Bowl 60 that Philadelphia is going to beat Baltimore, and they're going to repeat as Super Bowl champions, and the Super Bowl MVP for the second year in a row is going to be Jalen Hurts. And I understand again that I might be biased, and I'm an Eagles fan. There is a very, very plausible percentage. There's a very, very good chance that this could happen. And even if you hate the Eagles, I think you have to agree that there's a very good chance that they could repeat as champions, and Jalen Hurts could get Super Bowl MVP again. So I think for the most part, those are my predictions, both team-wise and individual. I think that they're pretty solid, or at least I hope they will be. And that's it for the video. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to my channel. It's going to be a very fun season. I have a lot of great surprises in store for you guys. I think you're going to enjoy. Take care. Stay away from the marijuana.